kind of hit on that as well. So those will be the two main topics that we'll talk about here in the A block. You just make sure you guys are expanding on your points and taking it to wherever you need to be, and just good energy. And I'll just lead you guys, and I'll let you know when we need to wrap up the segment.
Okay.
Kevin.
All right, I'm in a good spot.
You're in a good spot? Okay.
All good?
Okay. And you're clear on all that traffic?
George, Bruce, Len.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, guys, here we go. We'll start here shortly. Good, Cole.
Kevin,
Yep.
You said George, Bruce, Len. I think Malik said George, Len, Bruce. Just make sure you guys are.
George, Len, Bruce. Yeah, George, Len, Bruce.
Okay.
Copy. George, Len, Bruce.
Correct.
Save the best for last.
Right.
All right, guys, here we go. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Hey, back again. Another edition of Cubs 360 presented by Miller Lite is on the air. I'm Cole Wright. I'll be holding it down for the next 30 minutes at your service. And today, it's a special day because we have a special guest on the program. Now, he's a political commentator and he writes for the Washington Post. He's also a lifelong Cubs fan who grew up down there in Champaign, Illinois. Welcome to Cubs 360. George Will. George, thanks for stopping by, man.
Glad to be with you.
Absolutely. Let's meet your running buddies today because it'll be season 16 on the call for the Chicago Cubs. You know him, you love him, you see him here all the time. It's Len Casper. And speaking about a guy that we see here all the time, I'm convinced he doesn't have anything else to do, just like myself. He's a Marquee Sports Network contributor from 670 The Score. It's Bruce Levine. Now, guys, on tap today, that shortstop first base debate for Ernie Banks when it comes to the Cubs all-time team, plus Alex Rodriguez to the National League, not as a player, but potentially as an owner. We'll discuss that and much, much more as the day progresses. But first things first, of course, we have to tackle that top story as we usually do, because Major League Baseball players, they will not renegotiate the terms of an agreement that they reached with the league on March 26th, as you may recall. Now, Tony Clark, the head of the Players Association, he told the Associated Press, quote, that the negotiations are over. An earlier report indicated the union would have to agree to lower salaries if games are played without fans. So, George, we know Tony Clark. He was on the Detroit Tigers for quite some time, and he is now the head of the Players Association. We heard that they won't take any further pay cuts. So what do you make of all this once the dust settles?
Well, the union, which may be the most powerful union in the world in terms of its control over the industry it represents people in, is as powerful as it is at getting wonderful salaries for its members because those members draw fans through the turnstiles and draw eyeballs and ears to the broadcast. If all of that collapses, it's hard to see how you can say that the ownership, which negotiated these contracts under one set of assumptions, has to fulfill the contracts under radically different circumstances. So it seems to me, if you have, say, and this is possible, it seems to me, at most a 50-game season, played in neutral parks, it's not clear to me that fans are going to look upon this as anything other than a glorified exhibition season. And they're simply not going to draw the attention that advertisers assumed when they signed the broadcast agreements and all the rest. So it seems to me a bit dogmatic for the union to say that the way the world looked in the middle of March is the way it has to look in the middle of, say, of July.
And taking it one step further from George, where are the revenues coming from? As he pointed out, this is a different track that we're looking at right now. We know that over 40% of the revenues come from the game day ticket sales and the ancillary issues around the game at the ballpark. So you're talking about maybe 60% of the money coming in revenue-wise for the Major League Baseball owners and players if and when there are games. And then again, what's predicated on advertising sales. So from all of that, you would have to say that the Players Association is going to have to be reasonable about what available monetary gains they get during these very tough times.
I read the Jeff Passan piece, and the line that really caught my eye was that some teams, and I don't know how many there are, maybe a very small handful, but some teams may believe that not playing a season may be more economically advantageous than playing a season at all with no fans and having to pay the players full freight. That's pretty scary for an industry that makes a lot of money. The last thing you want to do as an industry is put any of your constituents into a bankruptcy. So that's number one. Number two, I mean, I agree with everything Bruce and George said, that, you know, the owners are going to take a big hit. The players are going to have to as well. However, you always have to follow the money. And what I worry about the most, guys, is the veteran players who do not need the money, who have young children, who basically say, I would rather sit out than spend 3-4 months without my kids. I don't need the money. I'm making 20-30 million a year. I think it may come down to those guys deciding they have to do what's best for everybody and not necessarily for themselves. And as we know, I think good intentions are one thing, but when it comes down to the bottom line, there'll be some people, including possibly Scott Boras, who's maybe the most powerful person on the players' side, just saying that we don't want to set a precedent where we take less money than what we negotiated.
I think there's another problem that I think baseball hasn't quite come to terms with. What do you do with the numbers generated in a 50-game season in neutral parks? Do you count these in career statistics? Part of baseball's hold on its fan base is that it is a habit. Football is a spectacle, baseball is a habit. And the habit means taking seriously the sediment of numbers that is produced. What happens when you have a season that, dress it up how you will, does not look like anything other than spring training redux?
Absolutely. And George, you touched on neutrality, and there could be more potential sites for games because when you take a look at those locations, you can add Texas to the list of states that Major League Baseball is considering as a site for the 2020 Major League season. Now, a CBS Sports report has indicated that Major League Baseball is reviewing a proposal in which teams would be stationed in 3 different states. That would be Texas, Florida, and Arizona, and it's still unclear how the teams would be grouped. Now, the squads and their affiliated personnel, they would be isolated, and games would be held without fans. So we heard about the 3 hubs. So George or Len, let's go with you. How do you feel about the proposal of playing in 3 different places?
There have been a lot of ideas thrown out there. One is Arizona exclusively, one is Arizona and Florida, and the newest one is the one you just mentioned. I think this is maybe the easiest decision probably to make because all of the things that follow it become, I think, much trickier. But I'll bring up one logistical question about where we play. If there's some sort of temporary immigration ban, and I'm not making this political, but you have a lot of players right now who are actually probably not even in the United States. You have to get them to where we're going to play. So if you can get past that, to me, it almost doesn't matter where we play. I think they'll figure that out.
And again,
also,
sorry, George.
No, I was just going to say, a lot of fans think a baseball game means 25 players and 4 umpires and some coaches. With the security and with the trainers and with the clubhouse people and everyone else, there's probably 1,000 people involved in this. Now that gets pretty difficult under social distancing. And if we have, as is quite possible to have, a second bounce of this virus in late August or September, all these bets are off and all this is mere speculation.
Well, and one other thing to keep in mind, if we start up in late July or early August, that's head and head with the NFL. And there, as George mentioned so well and so succinctly, there's a momentum with baseball that occurs from spring training on April, May, June, July into the postseason. There will be no momentum. They'll be going head to head against the NFL in their startup. And how much interest will there be in baseball in a shortened season going head to head against the NFL and the other sports sneaking up very quickly after that?
Well, we'll see where the ideal location eventually is, whether it be Arizona and Florida, Florida, and Texas. Only time will tell. There's still more to come right here on this show because he's a gentleman and a scholar, and you won't find a bigger Cubs fan than that man right there, George Will. He's seen some of the best and biggest moments in the history of the Chicago Cubs franchise. And of course, we're going to discuss those and much more right here next on Cubs 360.
Good job, guys. Good segment. Okay, so good stuff there. George, just one thing, like I said, just to make sure, I'm kind of dictating who's speaking next on those messages. So just make sure you're checking from after each guy goes, and then you'll know.
Okay.
Yeah, are you?
All
It's always at the bottom.
All I see at the bottom is Malek, 244. Cole George interview. Okay, got it. I can do this.
Yeah. No, it was all good. That was all good. We're posting the show, so any overlap, we can talking guys that are talking over each other, we can clean up and edit. But that was a really good segment, you guys. Good stuff. All right, so this segment here, Cole, you're just going to bring us in. We're going to reintroduce George, and then we're just going to, ask him some questions about, growing up in the state of Illinois and growing up and being a Cubs fan. So we'll just go down the line on this, all right, for this segment. Cole, you'll do the first question, then Bruce, and then Lynn, and then we'll see where we are time-wise right there if we have time for more questions, okay? And then after this segment, Cole, you are teasing up our Cubs ultimate, our dream bracket lineup, okay? So that's your tease. I'll put that in there. So, all right. So Kevin, you can start on the single and then go to the 4, and then when we do the questions, each guy we can just stay on the 2 shots. So Cole and George, Bruce and George, Lynn and George. Cool.
So say one more time.
Yep. We'll just start on the single here, and then we'll go to the 4 shot. He'll introduce everybody, and then Cole will do his question with George. So then you can just go to a 2 shot. Then we'll hear from George, and then we'll go Bruce and George. We'll hear George's answer, and then we'll go Lynn and George and hear George's answer again, and I'll dictate where we are from there.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Back here on Cubs 360, presented by Miller Lite, and that was George Will, 2014, on the microphone on that 7th inning stretch. He, by the way, is the author of a book called A Nice Little Place on the North Side, Wrigley Field at 100. And honored to have you on the show today, George Will, joining us on Cubs 360, along with Bruce and Lynn. And George, we want to dig a little deeper about your Cubs fandom because we know that you grew up in Champaign, Illinois. So when it comes to your earliest Cubs memory, what is it?
Well, I know that it was 1948 when I was 7 years old. I decided to be a Cub fan when all my friends were becoming Cardinal fans. It was the dividing line in the state. And that was the year that the Cub ownership took out ads in the Chicago papers apologizing for the team. So I cannot be accused of being a front runner from the start. I grew up with, I remember Phil Cavaretta and Andy Pafko and Gene Hermansky and Eddie Mixis and Dutch Leonard and Paul Menner and Bob Rush and all those now largely forgotten players, and because many of them were, I'm afraid, forgettable. But it was baseball was literally in the air then. There were 4 teams in the radio region, the Browns and Cardinals and White Sox and Cubs. And Bert Wilson was the Cubs broadcaster. So it was just, to me, the Cubs represented metropolitan America, my glimpse of Chicago.
George, the Cubs were the lovable losers for so long, and especially after 1945 when you started to become a Cub fan and for so many years. How did you deal with the great success of 2016 and the fact that the Cubs had finally gotten over this idea that there was a curse, that they were a lousy organization, and that they were at the top of the heap?
The Cubs didn't even have a major league curse. I mean, the curse of the Bambino is one thing, but some guy's Billy Goat curse because he wasn't allowed to bring a farm animal into a metropolitan ballpark struck me as pretty inferior. Uh, I was I was at the Bartman game. I mean, I've been through an awful lot of this stuff. Uh, so in 2016, I instantly had the answer to a question I'd been asked. What will it be like if you win? Will the spell be broken and you won't care that much anymore? No, I wanted to win in 2017. I think dynasty is one of the most lovely words in the baseball lexicon. So 2016 was immensely satisfying. I think Cub fans owe an awful lot to a 17-minute reign in Cleveland. The most stupendous athletic achievement of that World Series was the Cleveland ground crew getting the tarp on and off in that time. But it all worked out well. And then again, this Cub fan woke up and said, that was fun. Let's do it again.
By the way, speaking of curses, the shot of Bruce is kind of reminding me of 1969, just a little bit too much. Hey, George, I want to bring it forward a little bit. Typically, I run into you actually in Washington, D.C., and kind of compare Cubs fandom with Nationals fandom. And while there was a history in Washington, for most fans who follow the Nationals now, they do not remember the old Senators. So what is a Washington Nationals fan like in terms of starting in 2005? And now that they've won a World Series, compare and contrast that to that of a Cub fan in 2016.
Well, they've been denied the great satisfaction of an opening day, pennant raising, ring distributing celebration. So there's a loss here. Washington is a town of a lot of people from elsewhere, and it takes a while for them to begin to identify with the local team. A lot of people come to town and they're still Tigers fans. They used to have the Tigers congressional offices had a Mayo Smith Society in honor of an old Tiger manager. Weaning them people away from the affection they brought with them from elsewhere has required work to develop, to use the word I've used before, the habit of baseball. I think it's working. They've had a lot of help because the Redskins have been so appalling. And the Redskins owner, Dan Snyder, is such an unsympathetic figure that while the Redskins 20 years ago owned Washington, today they are a distant third to the Nationals and the Capitals in hockey. So this is becoming a baseball town. I know that Ted Lerner, the principal owner, said that what they needed to break through and become more than a $2.2 million, 2.2 million fans a year franchise was to win the World Series. Well, they did it. And as bad luck would have it, they haven't been able to capitalize it yet, at least.
Well, George, since you've been a Cubs fan since you were 7 years old, you're going to be the perfect person to talk about this with next, because an all-time Cubs lineup, it's right around the corner. And it was put together with Banks, Williams, Rizzo, and Dawson. So who's going to start at first? And who's on the hill, starting pitcher? We're going to donate our 2 cents as soon as Cubs 360, presented by Miller Lite, hustles back.
All right, guys, good stuff there. George, were you able, and actually all of you guys, were you guys able to see that ultimate lineup, that dream lineup? If not, I can kind of.
I haven't seen it.
I did, because didn't it have extra players? Like,
yeah, let me
put like one extra player and one extra pitcher.
Yeah, let me go through it with you guys real quick. So this is Major League Baseball. It's the dream bracket. They're just matching up teams. The Cubs are going to play the Mets. I think the game it's actually today at noon Eastern, so it already happened. But for just the sake of the argument, we're going to talk about the Cubs lineup. And the Cubs lineup that they have is Gabby Hartnett and Jody Davis as catcher. They didn't make a decision there. Anthony Rizzo at first, Ryan Sandberg at second, Ron Santo at third, Ernie Banks at short, Billy Williams in left field, Hack Williams in center, and Sammy in right. They're pitching, and they didn't really pick a starting pitcher, but they gave us 4 starting pitchers: Fergie Jenkins, Mordecai Brown, Greg Maddox, and John Lester, and some relief pitchers, guys that they just listed as relief pitchers who are not all really relief pitchers. Kerry Wood, Jake Arrieta, Hippo Vaughn, Lee Smith, Bruce Sutter, Pedro Strop, and Carlos Marmol. And then on the bench for players, they had Andre Dawson as the DH, Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, Mark Grace, Aramis Ramirez, and Frank Chance. So what we want from you guys here is just talk about it. We're going to tee up the Miller Lite Refreshing Take. Right, Cole, you want to tee that up? We can go to Lynn here first because he's got some strong opinions on that. And then we can go to George, and then we can go to Bruce, okay? So we'll just hear your guys' opinion.
So do you want to tee that up that Ernie Banks should be the starting first baseman as opposed to shortstop?
Right. Right. And the thinking there is you got to be strategic about this and how do you get guys on the field. So if you want Javi on the field, do you move Ernie to first? And I think in actuality he played more games at first than he did at shortstop as a Cub.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
who am I going to first here?
But he won two MVPs as a shortstop. So we'll go Lynn first, then we'll go George, and then we'll go Bruce. So is that all good, George?
Got it.
Okay, cool.
So I've got two full screens, Malik, and then back on cam?
Correct.
Got it.
Okay. All right, everybody. Good energy here, guys. 2 more segments. You ready, Cole?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Cubs 360, presented by Miller Lite. Now, Major League Baseball and DraftKings, they lined up a list of all-time great Cubs and put them at each position. Let's have a look at this. Gabby Hartnett, he was at catcher. The infield, well, boasts Anthony Rizzo, Ryan Sandberg, Ron Santo, and, of course, Mr. Cub, Ernie Banks. Patrolling the outfield, Billy Williams, Hack Wilson, and Sammy Sosa, while Andre Dawson, he'll hold down the designated hitter duties. Now, let's take a look at the rest of the lineup. Ferguson Jenkins and Mordecai Three Fingers Brown, they lead the starting pitchers, while Kerry Wood and Jake Arrieta were put in the bullpen. Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, and Mark Grace, they will be on the bench. So back here on Cubs 360 with the guys, it's Bruce, Len, and George, and it got our wheels spinning here, guys. And let's get now to our Miller Lite Refreshing Take of the day. When it comes to this Cubs all-time team, Ernie Banks, he should be the starting first baseman, not the shortstop. Len, I'll start with you. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm a big no. Number one, if you take Ernie from shortstop, you remove all of his superpowers. He basically was a Hall of Famer at short. If his career ended in 1960 or 61, he might have been in the Hall of Fame anyway. His career OPS as a shortstop was .913. He redefined that position, which had never really been an offensive position. He also redefined it in this way. Taller players were not shortstops before Ernie took over that spot. He paved the way for guys like Cal Ripken, Alex Rodriguez, and Derek Jeter. The other issue I have with that take, Cole, is that first base in Cubs history, for me, Cap Anson would probably be number one. He had 3,400 hits. I think Anthony Rizzo, Derek Lee, Mark Grace, and maybe even Phil Cavarretta would be in the same conversation. So for me, Ernie's got to knock Javi off the team. I hate to do it, Javi. Sorry.
Well, that's right. I mean, Phil Cavarretta from Lane Tech right down the street deserves at least honorable mention. But I entirely agree with Len that Banks is significant because before he came along, shortstops were named Pee Wee Reese and Scooter Rizzuto, and you had Louis Aparicio. They were cute, but and that sort of defined what shortstop meant. And along came Banks with those wrists and that supple bat of his, and all of a sudden it was an offensive position to be expected to produce runs and to drive in runs. That's his significance in the history of baseball. There have been lots of people with 500 home runs, but he was the first to make a middle infielder that kind of producer.
And we're going to agree all the way across the board. Ernie Banks averaged 38 home runs a year as a shortstop in the 7+ seasons that he played shortstop till 1960. The rest of his career, he averaged 20 home runs for the next 11 or 11 and a half years of his career. So the impact, as Len and George both point out, is so significant on so many different levels. And, again, defining the position, as Len pointed out, is so important. But I do have a problem with some of the other parts of the lineup. And, again, I picked Sandberg on my team as well. But if you don't have Rogers Hornsby, who's the greatest right-handed hitter in the history of baseball, on your bench, there's something wrong with your bench. This is a guy that hit 358 for his career, has the all-time leading average for a Chicago Cub player, hitting 380 in 1929. So the bench needs a little tweaking, and Hornsby probably should be on.
Well, we will see. We'll see if our lineups jive with everyone else's, because we know that when it comes to the Cubs, we're the most learned voices out there. Isn't that right, gentlemen? Of course it is. All right. Now, still to come right here on Cubs 360, presented by Miller Lite. He went from a guy nobody wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole to a man with baseball's magic touch. So could Alex Rodriguez be Major League Baseball's next owner of the Metropolitans? We'll discuss that. That's next right here on Cubs 360, presented by Miller Lite. And Malik and Notch, I didn't have anything. So I just hammered that one out.
Gotcha.
Suzanne.
Yeah.
Hey, check that at the end there.
Give us a second here, guys.
Bruce's last statement, if you can.
Good job, Bruce, on Hornsby.
Thank you.
He's maybe the greatest. He might be the greatest right-handed hitter in the history of baseball.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
he is. And
he averaged 400 over a 4-year period.
Yeah.
he was only briefly with the Cubs over 4 years, but he managed as well.
Yep. Ronnie Santo didn't like him. He was his hitting coach. He said he was a tyrant.
Yeah, there's a great story with Hornsby telling Williams and Santo in a group of 20, you can play right now in the big leagues. You'll be an all-star for 10 years. The rest of you are not going to make it to the big leagues. I remember both Billy and Ronnie telling me that story for spring training 1959 when Hornsby was their hitting coach.
Who's your all-time second baseman, Joe Morgan or Rogers Hornsby?
Those are the two choices.
I'd pick Hornsby.
Hornsby was such a great hitter, and he hit for power in an era where there wasn't a lot of power until they juiced up the ball in the late 29 and 30 to attract more fans to the games. For the first time, the ball was juiced in the late 20s.
You guys go Joe Morgan over Robbie Alomar?
I probably would.
Yeah. I feel like that.
Boy, it's a tough one.
That Robbie Alomar, Omar Vizquel up the middle was probably the toughest double play duo of all time.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a tough choice.
All right, you guys. Last segment here. We'll have about 2.5 for this. So you know that you're getting this off of a Chris Myers tease where he's asking you a question about the game show. Do you have that traffic in front of you?
I do, but there's like double copy, but it says if you need to read it like a VO, are we going to answer like, well, maybe Anthony Rizzo, Chris? He's done, and then read it like that.
Yeah, something like that, something of that nature.
Okay.
What is that
Now,
napkin
do you want me to read the whole
sound?
thing, or just keep it short on that, and then get to the promo
Knocking
copy?
sound is
What,
cut
what
pointing.
exactly is your read?
Well, the read is, hey, well, Chris, Anthony Rizzo, he's the only Chicago player to cover White Sox to win a Platinum Glove. Did it all in 2016, season which he took home one of his 3 Gold Gloves and a World Series ring, the Platinum Glove, handed out since 2011 to the best defensive player among Gold Glove winners in each league. And then there's promo copy, and you can catch a new edition of Play at Home trivia at 7 Central.
Yeah, I don't think you need all of that. Just do it quickly and then get to the promo copy, and then just tee up the guys,
Okay,
and then
you got
tee
it.
up the last topic. All right, and then just go. We'll go Bruce, Lynn, George here. Let George have the final word, and we'll say goodbye like that. Okay, on the whole A-Rod and J-Lo possibly buying the Mets topic.
Yep.
So, Kevin, what I need here is, can you just start on Cole on a single? He's going to answer a question that's being posed to him by Chris Myers on a clip that we're going to put in post. He'll answer it, do a promo read, and then we'll come out to the 4-shot. He'll tee up a topic, and then we'll go right back down the line. Bruce, Lynn, and then George will wrap us up.
So I'm on camera for this, answering the question about Anthony Rizzo from Chris Myers?
Yeah, you're on camera.
Okay.
Yep.
You got it.
You good with that, Kevin?
All good.
Okay. Okay, guys, last segment. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, Chris, I don't know. Maybe it's Anthony Rizzo, the only Chicago player, Cub or White Sox, to ever take home a Platinum Glove, and he did so in 2016. What a season it was. And if stumping your friends at the water cooler, that's your thing, make a note, because you can catch a new edition of Play at Home at 7 p.m. Central. That's Wednesday, right here on Marquee Sports Network, as Chris Myers, as he gets you up to speed on everything with former Cub Dan Plesac and Carlos Pena. They're going to go head-to-head. Now, back here on Cubs 360, presented by Miller Lite with Bruce, Len, and George. And, guys, how about this? A-Rod and J-Lo, we know they're worth $700 million, but they're getting pretty serious about their bid to buy the New York Metropolitans. They've actually retained J.P. Morgan Chase to help them organize some funds. So when it comes to a 2009 World Series champ with the Yankees owning the Mets, Bruce, what's going on here?
Well, A-Rod's not going to let Derek Jeter one-up him by being an owner, a former teammate, and always trying to grab the headlines. So it's incumbent upon him and J-Lo to buy some interest, or the main interest, in the Mets. And it's not the first time in history that famous people have bought baseball teams, going back into the 50s, late 40s. The great comic Joey Brown, also Bob Hope, and Bing Crosby owned parts of the Indians and the Pittsburgh Pirates. So this is nothing new. It's famous people with a lot of money, and A-Rod would look good as an owner. He looks good in a suit.
I don't have a whole lot to add to it. I don't particularly care who owns the Mets, but I will say this. I do think the trend of former Major League players buying teams will continue, because over the last 20 years or so, we've seen the salary skyrocket to the point where a lot of guys are retiring with $150, $200, $300 million in the bank.
Count me as skeptical as to the net worth of J-Lo and A-Rod, frankly. I don't think combined they're nearly rich enough to own the Metropolitans. Their value, I don't know what Forbes is rating them at now, but it's probably at least a $2 and probably a $3 billion team by now, particularly if you count their sports network. In the late 70s, I was having dinner with some businessmen in Omaha, and they said, what would you really like? And I said, I'd like to be an owner of the Cubs. I'd like to own a share of stock, which they then had. The guy across the table said, I can help you with that. His name was Warren Buffett. And I did get a share of Cubs stock, which I guess made me an owner. In that sense, Derek Jeter is an owner of the Marlins. The real owner is a guy who's got a lot of money from a hedge fund. And I think if J-Lo and A-Rod become the figureheads of the Mets, the real owner is going to be someone with a lot deeper pockets.
Well, George, maybe you can set up a one-on-one Omaha Steaks dinner with Warren Buffett, with A-Rod and J-Lo. Hopefully you can facilitate that. And thanks for stopping by the show today. We really appreciate the time. And
I
for
enjoyed it.
everybody at Marquee Sports Network, including Bruce and Len, I'm Cole Wright. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Enjoy your day.
Good job, guys. Good stuff. Thank you, George, for stopping
What's up,
by.
gentlemen?
Really
Good stuff, George.
Anytime.